Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Angie Raza. I'm the Texas State Director for Familia, Vota.
And I'm Debbie Chen with OCA-Greater Houston. I'm the Civic Engagement Programs Director.
Today, we have a wonderful event planned for you. We are doing a Congressional District Forum for Congressional District 22. We have some candidates here with us that will be joining us for some really important questions that we have prepared for them. This event is being co-hosted by Mi Familia Vota and OCA-Greater Houston, and will be moderated by Renee Cross. Mi Familia Vota is a national civic engagement organization. We focus on building Latino political power and representation through civic engagement. This election is extremely important to our community and our allied communities that include the immigrant community, as well as our AAPI community partners. So we're very glad to be able to co-host this event with OCA.
Likewise, OCA-Greater Houston is a part of a national organization, OCA National, headquartered in Washington, D.C. Our chapter was founded in 1973, and we are a social justice, civil rights, leadership, and education organization. And so we also do significant amounts of civic participation, civic engagement work every year. So we're very happy to partner with Mi Familia Vota. And I encourage all of you to find out more about our programs. We actually conduct a joint youth high school training program year-round with Mi Familia Vota.
So just to give you context about Congressional District 22, as you can see on the map, it expands a great large portion of the Houston region. You're looking at parts of Brazoria County, Fort Bend County, some of the cities that are listed on here. So if you are looking at the map and you see that this is your district, you are definitely tuning into the right conversations. You can also see the demographics that are listed here. District 22 is one of the most diverse districts across the nation. So we know that there's a lot of communities of color and a lot of different stakeholders in this congressional district. And we hope that the questions that we have prepared today will resemble the communities that live in this district. These are currently all the candidates that are running for Congressional District 22. All the candidates were invited. We have 2 that will be joining us today. And we are just very excited that we have attendance from candidates, again, that will be joining us for a really important conversation on some of the most pressing issues to both of our organizations. And we're so fortunate to have Renee Cross from the Hobby School of Public Affairs moderating this conversation in this forum. I'm going to turn it over to her so she can introduce herself and then kick it off to our candidates for their introductions. Thank you. Thank you, Renee, for joining us.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Renee Cross. I'm the Senior Director at the Hobby School of Public Affairs at the University of Houston. I'm also a political science lecturer. To start off, let's talk a little bit about the forum guidelines. The questions were written by Mi Familia Vota and OCA-Greater Houston. There will be 5 questions with 2-minute answers. And sorry, guys, no rebuttals. The candidates will have 1 minute for their opening statements and then 2 minutes for their closing statements. The order of the candidates' responses was determined by a coin toss beforehand, and Mr. LeBlanc will be going first today. After we finish up our Q&A, we will then introduce the students from Cinco Ranch High School, and they will conduct a lightning round of yes/no questions. So let's begin. Mr. LeBlanc, you will now have 1 minute for your opening statement.
Hi, I'm Joseph LeBlanc. I like to call myself a Mexicajun. My mom is Hispanic. My dad is from Louisiana. His family's from Louisiana. So I've got a little bit of mixture in there. I'm a veteran. I spent 3 years in the Army before I got medically discharged in 2005. And then after that, I did things from trying to find my way back into civilian life, and then went to school for education and history because history is my passion at NEU. I then moved back to Texas, where I'm from. I went to Maid Creek High School. That's where I graduated, class of '01. So I'm from this area. I've lived in this area for a long time. I've seen the changes of the city, and I've noticed that a lot of people are being ignored here, and we need to change that. So I want to represent everybody here in this area in District 22. I want to make sure that everybody gets a voice, not just the people putting money in my pocket, which isn't much. So.
Preston Kulkarni.
My name is Preston Kulkarni. I'm originally from this area. I'm the son of an immigrant, graduate of University of Texas and Harvard. I spent a year in the U.S. Senate working on foreign policy, veterans affairs, and defense, and 14 years overseas as a foreign service officer. But I came back because I believe that the values we stood for overseas are all being threatened at home, especially the demonization of immigrants. And culminating with the Charlottesville Nazi rally in 2017, I decided the most patriotic thing to do would be to resign, come home, and run the most inclusive campaign ever in Texas history. We are now campaigning in 27 different languages. I'm proud to say that we almost won in 2018. And then our incumbent, Pete Olson, he dropped out of the race. So now we have an open seat. If elected, I will be the first person of color ever elected in this district and the first Asian American ever elected to U.S. Congress in Texas history.
So our first question. Texas has recently surpassed 15,000 deaths due to the coronavirus. Yet there are plans to open up businesses, and many schools are starting in-person, face-to-face instruction. What specific measures do you believe should be taken for a safe return to school for students and for our families? Mr. LeBlanc?
I believe that the government should be telling everybody what they advise. I believe that they should say, hey, look, these are the guidelines we want you to follow. But at the same time, the federal government doesn't have the right to make blanket laws on this aspect. They can't make mask mandates for the entire nation. Vice President Biden actually admitted to that last week, that he doesn't have the authority as president to make these kind of decisions. It is up to state and local to decide how to operate. But then again, the fact that we have had so many businesses close, and some of them are closed forever now due to this pandemic, because of the way that the state and the local governments have regulated this whole issue, has caused more problems. We've had a rise in suicide. We've had a rise in alcoholism, a rise in domestic violence, not just in our area, but all across the nation, because people are stuck home. And because they can't go to work, because they can't earn livings, people are getting kicked out of their houses now because the government hasn't been there and done the things that they need to do. And I think that it's up to the people to decide, okay, this is what I've been told, maybe I should follow it. But when you start putting people in prison and start fining them for it, that's kind of counterproductive to the whole thing.
All right. Well, first of all, I've been asked what my position is on reopening schools. And I say that my position is that politicians shouldn't be making these decisions based on their ideology. We should be making these decisions based on public health expertise and based on science. So, for example, we need to make sure that we are controlling the virus, reducing ICU capacity, hospitalization, positivity rates. We need to make sure that we are not doing things like my Republican opponent who said that mask requirements are communist and un-American. We need to encourage people to wear masks. We also need to get personal protective equipment out to our schools. I know that teachers who are being asked to get the personal protective equipment themselves, just like they have to buy school supplies. We need to make sure we provide those to teachers. We also need to make sure that we have digital devices available for people who need remote learning, because we don't know how long it'll be before we control this virus. And lastly, we need to have rapid testing. And this is true for our entire society, because if we don't have testing that comes back within a few hours, if you don't get your results for 7 to 10 days, you don't know if you're infected during that time. And that affects our businesses, but it also affects our schools. And all of us want our children and our educators to be safe in the educational environment. So we need to base everything on public health expertise, on science, not on political ideology.
Since Hurricane Harvey in 2017, flooding has been an increasingly important issue for this district. with repeated flooding from storms such as Imelda, seen in areas such as Sugar Land, Missouri City, and the greater Katy area. We see residential neighborhoods and schools flooding more often and with more severity. What are some steps that Congress can take to mitigate these issues? Mr. LeBlanc?
I think Congress, the Congress people who are put in that position should work with the Army engineers. They need to decide plans to move ahead to limit the amount of flooding we have. Houston, I've said this in plenty of other times, Houston has grown so much in the past 10 to 15 years. When I graduated high school in 2001 to where it is now, Katy's a completely different place. There used to be rice farms on the other side of Clay, right where I lived. And now they're neighborhoods. So we've seen a giant expansion of our area without the same kind of limitations and expansion of our drainage system. We live in a swamp where we should understand that this ground is not made to sustain all this concrete and asphalt. And I think that we need to work with the people who actually have knowledge in this to devise a plan on how to move forward, and then pass that plan on to local and state governments so that they can try to implement it in a quicker manner than the federal government ever does anything. So that's my belief.
So growing up here, we've experienced 500-year flood event after 500-year flood event. This doesn't mean that we're safe for the next 1,000 years. It means that climate change is real. And first, we have to deal with the effects of flooding. So we need to make sure we strengthen our levees here around the greater Houston area. We need to invest in infrastructure. We've needed infrastructure for a very long time. That includes storm sewers, pumps, overall drainage improvement. So some of those might be larger investments, like building a third reservoir or even having a canal with a dynamic pumping system based on the kind of technology that we see in other countries. But we also need to make sure that flood insurance is more accessible. We need to streamline the relief process. But the bottom line is that we have to do something about the root causes of our climate change. And we need to admit that climate change is not a hoax, and we need to base our interventions on science.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Many Texans rely on healthcare through their employers. During COVID, of course, many are facing job loss and therefore losing their healthcare benefits. How will you ensure that Texans who have lost their jobs will have access to healthcare during this pandemic? Mr. LeBlanc?
Yes, my idea is to open up the markets. When there's more competition in the market, there you see a drop of prices. Problem that we have right now is that the states, due to the McCarran-Ferguson Act of 1945, have been able to limit which companies are allowed to operate in their states. This has led to 2-3 health insurance companies that own the entirety of all insurance in the state, which has caused them to basically, hey, we can jack our prices up however much we want. Now we can force people into having to have employment-based insurance instead of buying their own private insurance. So reevaluating that act, trying to fix it or get rid of it altogether and write a new one would help allow interstate commerce. Another thing I would like to do is fix the patent laws that have allowed the big pharma companies and allow the medical equipment companies own these patents for all eternity. Basically, all they do is change one little composition of their drug and they can repatent it for another 10-15 years. And same with the equipment. They can go and change one little aspect, change one from one type of metal to a different type of metal, and then they get a brand new patent for the same thing, and there's no competition allowed there. And that allows them to control the generics from ever coming out, to drop the drug prices. That allows them to any kind of generic equipment to come out into the market and to offer a competition. And by doing that, I really believe that opening the markets would be better than adding more regulation from the federal government, because a lot of the federal government regulations that we have now are what caused the spike in our health insurance since the 1960s.
Okay, Mr. Kulkarni?
So when I was 18 years old, my father got acute myelocytic leukemia. I was at the University of Texas. I had to drop out of school to come home and take care of him. And I did his IVs, I did his physical therapy. I took him back and forth to MD Anderson. Unfortunately, after a battle with bone marrow transplant, when I was 19 years old, my father passed away, and our family was left on the point of bankruptcy, taking donations just to stay afloat. That is still the #1 cause of bankruptcy in this country today, and Texas is still the most uninsured state in the country. This is unconscionable, especially during a pandemic when 650,000 people have lost their health care across Texas this year alone. Almost 40,000 just in my district have lost their health care. And there's a lawsuit by the Texas Republicans right now to take away health care from millions of more people, including protection for pre-existing conditions. We're the only campaign that is going to actually protect people's health care. We need to protect and expand access to health care. We need to lower the cost of medication, especially prescription drugs, because we should not be playing politics with people's health and their lives. And that's what's happened here with the lack of expansion of Medicaid and the current lawsuit to take away health care promoted by the Republicans.
Thank you. Our next question, we return to COVID. So COVID-19 has resulted in 3.6 million Texans filing for unemployment relief since mid-March. What actions can Congress take to stimulate the economy and support our families after this massive wave of job losses?
Okay. So here's my thing. I'm a libertarian. I believe that the government handing out money all willy-nilly is completely wrong and not the way that the government should be handling money in the first place. But at the same time, most of the unemployment and everything that has happened in the past 8 months is because of the government. It's because the government shut down businesses, because the government won't let, a gym owner open his gym. It won't let, a restaurant serve full service for a while. So the government caused those problems. I kind of am now torn. I have to say, okay, let's get the people that have lost their job, that have been restricted to their homes, that have, can't even open their business, can't go to their business and work. Let's give them some money because we're basically forcing them to stay home. But then you have bills like Nancy Pelosi's bill that she just wrote, the stimulus package. I don't know if any of y'all have looked at it. It's 2,153 pages long. They got it the morning that they were supposed to vote on it. And then after getting to page 150, there was a lot of money going to a lot of places other than the people of the United States. They were going to different organizations, going to different arts things. This is what a lot of the Congress people do when it comes to these stimulus packages. They say, okay, we're going to give the money to the people, but we're going to go and divvy it out to, Philharmonic, who's going to go and fire all their employees next week. We're going to give it to United Airlines, who just got $5 billion from the government, the last stimulus pack. Then last week fired 32,000 people while also sponsoring the U.S. presidential debates. So if they have $5 billion from the government and they go and turn around and give it back to the debates, this is the kind of things that happen all the time in Congress when they're doing money allocation. They'll say, okay, this is the money that we need to give. Let's add everything else on. And that's not how it should work. It should have been, okay, here's the money to the people. Here's the money to the small business. Let's sign this. We'll hash everything out later. But they can't do that. And then they start pointing fingers at each other.
So as with schools, everybody wants our businesses to be open, but we want them to be open safely. And that means that we have to deal with the pandemic. So again, we have to wear masks. We have to get personal protective equipment out to our frontline workers, which could have saved an estimated 100,000 lives. We have to make sure we have rapid testing available so that workers know that they are safe so they can go back to work, not in 7 to 10 days, but within a few hours like we have in our hospitals. But on top of that, we have to acknowledge that some of the burden has been disproportionate here. The burden of deaths, 2/3 of deaths under age 65 have been from Black and Brown communities. The burden on Black and Brown communities in their employment has also been worse, and especially for small businesses. So we need to make sure that we're providing targeted relief to the industries which have been hit the hardest, and some of which they won't even be able to work even into the next year. Secondly, for extremely small businesses or sole proprietors, I've been talking to banks about all of the red tape and the loan forgiveness for businesses that have loans of less than $150,000, for example. We need to make sure that we cut out that red tape and we get them that loan forgiveness. And then lastly, we need to help those businesses, once we get past the pandemic, to scale up quickly. So that means access to more loans, access to startup tax credits, so that we can get back to life as normal, which is what we all want. We just want to do it safely without playing political games with people's lives.
Thank you. Okay. Our next question is about immigration. Will you support comprehensive immigration reform that protects family-based immigration, including siblings, parents, and includes a pathway to citizenship? Mr. LeBlanc.
I would like to rework the entire immigration system. I think our immigration system right now has made it extremely costly. It's made it extremely hard and time consuming to deal with. It can take up to years before you even get the right to work in this country now. So it's caused the high rate of illegal immigration because they can't afford the time. They can't, they're willing to risk their lives to become Americans. And that's what I want. I want to make it easier for people to come into this country. People of good faith, they just want to come here and make a life for themselves. I want them to be able to come into this country easier than they currently have it. So I honestly tear it down and build it back up from something to something new and something easier, that more Ellis Island than what we have right now, where it's armed guards on our borders making sure that nobody gets in.
Thank you.
As the son of an immigrant myself, I believe that immigration is not a threat to the United States. Immigration is the history of the United States. Waves of immigrants who have made our country so dynamic and so diverse and have made us the leader in the world. And so whether we're talking about highly skilled immigration, whether we're talking about family reunification, these are our values. We care about strong families here. If we care about family values, then we need to make sure that families can stay together. And that includes also dealing with our labor needs and being honest about it. We know that we have a black market here in Texas and in California, across the South. And when employers offer work, if they're breaking labor laws, if they're undercutting the labor laws we fought for over 100 years, then people will supply that work. So we need to have a comprehensive immigration reform that actually enforces our labor standards here in America that we fought for. But then people who are here, who are working, who are productive members of society, we need to give them a pathway to citizenship. Instead of playing games with these families' lives. I know families who've been broken up through no fault of their own, simply because we can't do the work, the hard political work of coming together and reforming our immigration system. And then lastly, I would say, for the people who are most vulnerable, people who are fleeing horrible violence in places like El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, who are coming and seeking safety and refuge, we need to uphold our basic values. I don't care what your faith is or your political background is. When you see a child being taken away from their mother, we know those are not our values as Americans and as human beings, and our values have to come first.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that wraps up our Q&A section, and now we'll get to the fun part. We're now going to bring up our students. So our students are from Cinco Ranch High School, and they will conduct the lightning round segment. So they will introduce themselves, ask the questions, and you guys just signal yes or no. Okay?
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Julia Jang, and I'm a senior from Cinco Ranch High School. I'm here with two of my team leaders from our Social Advocacy Club, and I'm here to do a quick lightning round of yes and no questions. So our first question is, do you think our COVID-19 response should take into account the pandemic's disproportionate impact on Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities? Okay, so that's a yes from yes. Thank you. I'm going to pass the next question on to Parker.
Hey guys, I'm Parker. I'm going to ask two questions. The first is, should every Texan have health insurance and affordable health care? So both yeses. And my second is, do you support raising the federal minimum wage? And we have one yes and one no. I'll pass it on to Angel now.
Hi, my name is Angel Huang. I'm also a senior at Cinco Ranch High School. So the first question I have for you guys is, do you believe the presence and activity of political extremist groups in Texas should be addressed? Both yeses. For the second question, do you think the Gulf Coast is experiencing more storms as a result of climate change? Okay, so 1 yes and 1 maybe. Thank you for answering. That's all we have for the lightning round. We will turn it back to Renee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Okay, now we have some questions from our audience through Facebook Live. First question. I don't think that COVID has increased things like alcoholism or domestic abuse. However, I do think these are underlying issues that COVID has exposed more, and that there are more systematic issues sneaking in. Will you work on combating these issues, and how will you combat these issues?
I would love to work on those issues because I think that domestic abuse is something that has been, it's something that we address, but it's something that we haven't been able to get rid of. Being somebody who was in the military, that was something that was often a problem. I was a military police officer in the U.S. Army. So most of the responses that we had were either drunk soldiers or domestic violence. And DV is one of the scariest things to show up to as an officer. You can ask any local law enforcement or any military law enforcement. They will tell you the domestic violences are the scariest things for us to respond to because things change. You show up, you go to apprehend the person that's doing the abusing, and then the other person's like, no, don't take away that person, and then they start attacking the cops. So I think we do need to address domestic violence. We need to start looking into alcoholism more. I think that it's something that we kind of ignore because we're so busy thinking about other drugs. And we need to offer people chances to get the help that they need, that we need to offer them the ability to do that. And a lot of that has to do, honestly, with healthcare and dropping the price of healthcare.
Okay. Mr. Kulkarni?
So I think domestic abuse is a huge issue. In fact, I've worked with organizations here like DIA in the Houston area that help women who are trying to flee abusive situations, which is extremely difficult, and it's become even more difficult during the pandemic because trying to find some kind of housing it was already a big enough problem, and now people don't want to burst someone else's bubble that they protected around themselves during quarantine. But I was working on these issues even in my tours in the Foreign Service. In Iraq, I helped build one of the first ever women's shelter for domestic abuse in Kirkuk province, where I was. So this is a systemic and pervasive issue, as is the issue of substance abuse. And I'll put that broadly, not just alcohol abuse, but drug abuse as well. And we need to treat it like a health problem, as was alluded to by my colleague. We haven't treated this as a major health problem across the United States, and especially the way that we conduct our war on drugs. We're treating a medical problem like a criminal justice problem. So I think all of those things related to substance abuse need to be taken together. But both of these are also related to a broader issue, which is mental health access, which impacts so many different aspects, including things like cruelty to animals. I was at the Humane Society recently, and they said that a lot of the animals that they rescue, it's not from people intending to be cruel, but who have mental health issues that go undiagnosed. And so I think at the root of so many of these problems in our society, whether it's domestic abuse, whether it's a substance abuse, whether it's gun violence, we have to have proper mental health access. It has to be part of the healthcare continuum across the society. And I want to make heavier investments in giving people access to mental health services across our society.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's see what else we have. Do you think the strict quarantine on the coronavirus should have lasted as long as it did through mid-June instead of late May when the cases were declining?
Do I think the strict quarantine should have lasted? I don't. Honestly, me personally, I don't think that the quarantine, the initial quarantine, the 15 days to flatten the curve, like that was the plan. But it's turned into 180 days now of basic quarantine. And to be fair, the only people that have been doing well during this whole time are Jeff Bezos, they're, the Waltons, they're the big giant corporations. Those are the people that have been succeeding like crazy during this whole pandemic. Why? Because their competition's gone now. So do I think that the quarantine is? No, I don't, because I think that a lot of the quarantine has to do with the fact that the people that run these big giant corporations put a little bit of money into politicians' pockets. That's my believe. I do believe that the coronavirus is something that we should be worried about. I think it's something that we should take action to try to prevent the spread of. But I think that some of the stats and some of the information that's been given out by the media has been kind of misconstrued and been twisted to fit political gains instead of actually trying to address the problem.
So I think without a doubt, our coronavirus response has been a failure. And compared to most other major countries in the world, I served overseas in Asia in my time in the Foreign Service. Compare us to Taiwan, compare us to South Korea, which got its first case the same day as we did. Compare us to Japan, which has almost half the population of the United States crammed in a landmass the size of California, and it's had about 1,500 deaths. And when I talked to my colleagues there, asked, what do they do? They say, we wear masks. Which it sounds very simple, but we have played political games with people's lives this entire time. If we had a national strategy, if we actually used the time of the quarantine to try and control the pandemic, had contact tracing and testing, rapid testing available universally, if we had personal protective equipment out to people, if we were encouraging people to wear masks, rather than, as my Republican opponent said, calling masks communist and un-American, or trying to turn this into a political issue. It should not be an issue of conservative versus liberal, or red versus blue, whether we wear masks or not. It's actually an issue of patriotism. The most patriotic thing you can do is wear a mask, because it shows that you care about your fellow citizens, you care about your community, and you care about your family. The people who are most likely to be infected are your own family members. You transmit it at home. And so doing these basic things, wearing masks, personal protective equipment, rapid testing, that would help us get this under control. And the opening or closing without these things, it's meaningless to talk about that, because we have to get the virus under control. Texas has the second highest number of cases in the country. Texas has the second highest number of deaths in the country. And America has the largest number of deaths in the world, over 200,000 people who didn't have to die.
Thank you. I think we have a question from a student. We have from Anton. With COVID heavily impacting how schools and classes function, do you think we should still have standardized testing?
If I was running for school board, I'd get rid of standardized testing altogether. I think the standardized testing is not the proper way to evaluate teachers, because that's who it's really evaluating. It's not evaluating the teachers, the students. It's evaluating the teachers. I think that there's people that aren't like myself. I do well at standardized tests. Throw those standardized tests in front of me, I will ace that without even studying. That's just how I am. That's how I've always been. But I know that there's people that struggle with standardized testing. They get overwhelmed by that, and that can affect their overall score. I don't think standardized testing should be in school at all. But again, I'm not running for school board, but I would definitely advocate for it in Congress. I would try to push away from No Child Left Behind. I think No Child Left Behind has done worse for our education system than has actually helped the children.
So, similarly, I think that standardized testing, it advantages certain people. I also, in my family, we didn't come from a background of money, but we were good at standardized tests, which gave us a special advantage. And what we're seeing now during COVID is, even at some universities, they're going away from accepting SAT scores as a standard. So there are many different ways to measure learning and capability. I think the one part that I would include in the question is high stakes testing, because the way that our testing is done here is that we put a lot of pressure on this one test as the measure for everything, all of your learning for an entire year. And so obviously you respond to incentives. So teachers will have to teach the test, students will have to base their entire curriculum off of that. And it doesn't measure whether we're actually learning, whether we actually have a proper continuum of education, and really whether we're preparing our young people to succeed in the world, which is the real goal. And so I think we need an overhaul of our entire education system that's based around those goals, preparing kids for the world in the 21st century, not preparing them to take a very specific high stakes standardized test.
Well, I think if some of these kids could vote, they'll probably be voting for both of you guys, just on that. Okay, let's see what else we have. How will you ensure Black and brown lives are protected from systematic racism within policing, education, and healthcare, and uplift Black and brown voices?
This is a interesting question. I do believe that our police forces, I'm not going to say that the police forces themselves, but there's individual policemen that have a history of targeting certain groups of people, whether they're Hispanic or blacks. I mean, we see it in the numbers, but in all honesty, when it comes down to it, more of the problems is class and income than it is race-based. You look at where the high crime areas are, and it's low-income neighborhoods. It's whether those are grouped up with somebody's race or religion. That's something that we can look into. I think that the education system, the public education itself, is kind of wonky anyways, the way they distribute money, because you see that they distribute money certain places better than other places, and then certain schools get better things than other schools. So that's on the school boards. I mean, and they should be held accountable. They should be held accountable by the state. They should be held accountable by the federal Department of Education. When it comes to healthcare again is one of those things, like if it was a cheaper resource, it would be more available to everybody, and it would be more available to the Latino community. It'd be more available to the Asian community. It'd be more available to the Black community. I will say that where the Asian community gets kind of screwed is in education, because they are held to higher standards. You look at Harvard, just got in trouble earlier this year, or was it earlier this year or last year, for having their standards for Asian Americans super high, while everybody else's standards were a lot lower. But they're still people of color, aren't they? Like, and this is where we have to start looking at. We just need to make everything, don't care about race, just treat everybody the exact same. That goes for police officers, that goes for our education, that goes for our healthcare. Somebody's color of their skin shouldn't change the way that you treat them. And I think that's what we need to instill in our government officials. That's what we need to instill in our police forces. And that's what we need to instill in our educators.
So this is a very large question to answer in a couple of minutes, but I would say the three biggest things are: one, to acknowledge that there is an issue, and that means acknowledging our history. So, for example, most people probably don't know the history of redlining, why we are in the certain neighborhoods that we're in, that the impact that U.S. government policies have had on our current situation in America today, why certain communities are disadvantaged, why they're in food deserts, why there are disparities in healthcare and education, in the criminal justice system, and all of these things have a long history of policy in the United States. We need to acknowledge that. Secondly, we need to have specific evidence-based policies that will try to address those situations. So, for example, policing. This is a big one this year. We know that there was success under the Community-Oriented Policing Services program in the previous Department of Justice, working with police departments, not making this a situation of police officers versus the community, but actually trying to help police departments improve with things like body cameras, things like implicit bias training for officers, and also doing things like removing officers who commit repeated infractions and not letting them just shuffle from one police department to another. Because when you remove those officers, it actually makes everyone safer, because the community trusts the police more, and the police feel more safe when they're out in the community, which is the ultimate goal. And then the last thing is that we need to make sure that we actually have representation. If you don't have a seat at the table for all of these Black and brown voices, then it's very hard to understand the perspective of these communities, what they're going through, to empathize with them, because people don't see it sometimes. Sometimes if you don't come from this community, you may not see what someone is going through every single day. If you haven't walked a mile in someone's shoes, if you haven't had someone clutch their purse, if you haven't had a doctor treat you differently within the system, if you haven't had a teacher treat you differently growing up as a kid, then you don't have those same experiences. So representation, it matters. It matters deeply, especially here in Texas 22, where you have the most diverse district in the entire country, but we have never had a person of color represent us in our history.
Thank you. That reminds me, former Governor Ann Richards once said, if you don't have a seat at the table, you'll be on the menu. So very important. Okay, let's see. I believe we have one more. Congressional District 22 constituents live across 3 county jurisdictions, of course, Fort Bend, Brazoria, and Harris. What steps will you take to ensure that all constituents have COVID-19 resources, regardless of their county and its leadership?
Well, I think that the resources should honestly be, if that's the way we're going to go, if we decide, and as Congress, I'm just giving a hypothetical. If that's the way we go, it should be based off of population and off of the greater needs. Basically, is this county a more well-off county? And they have less people. They shouldn't get as much stuff as, say, Harris County, which has a giant population of all different demographics. Same with Fort Bend and Brazoria. I think it should be based off of population more than anything else. So I think it should be equally distributed.
Well, so I think there's a couple of things here. One is that we have to have a national strategy to deal with this national problem. COVID-19 is the biggest challenge that we've ever faced in our lifetimes, and we need to treat it as such. So the same way that we reacted after 9/11 as a nation, we should be reacting that way as a nation, and we should not be behind all of these other countries in testing, in PPE distribution, in mask requirements. But secondly, our state and local governments are under a crunch right now, just the way that our private sector is. And so if they don't have the resources right now to provide within their communities, then the federal government must make sure that those state and local governments are funded properly, because otherwise the entire system breaks down. And that's what we saw happen a lot over the last 6 or 7 months, is there was just chaos. Why was it that we couldn't get masks and gloves to people properly? Because there wasn't coordination across the national, the state, and the local level. And obviously the funding is a big part of it. But even before the pandemic, people were playing political games with people's health care, with their lives. So for example, the lack of Medicaid expansion here, when every state chose whether or not to expand Medicaid, that wasn't a matter of liberty or freedom. What that was, it was playing games with people's lives. So in Texas 22, for example, the Hispanic community, which is more than 1/4 of our population, they have 4 times the average poverty rate. And so the lack of Medicaid expansion, it disproportionately impacted this community. And I don't think that our health care, our educational opportunities, they should be dependent on our zip code or our ethnicity. We should have equal access to all of those things, regardless of where we live.
Thank you. Let's see. Boy, these folks have some questions for you guys. That's a good thing. What do you think about President Trump's idea to push to fill Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat on the Supreme Court before the election?
I know I'm gonna get some heat for this, but the Constitution says that the president has the right to nominate a Supreme Court justice after the seat is vacated, and Senate has the right to immediately validate within whatever time. So honestly, the president has every right to. In fact, President Obama did the same thing back in 2016. He nominated Garland. Garland was shot down by the Senate because the Senate was Republican controlled. So I think that Miss Ginsburg, the Honorable Ginsburg, she was of the belief that Hillary Clinton was going to win the presidency, and that's why she did not retire back when she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And I think that caused a lot of what we're seeing now. But honestly, according to the Constitution, the president has every right to do what he did, and the Senate has every right to approve before the election. And I think that that's something we're just going to have to live with. And I think that's something that everybody's going to have to live with, because it's in the Constitution. It's literally the document that says what our government can and can't do. So like I said, I don't think everybody's going to like my answer, but that's the truth of it.
So, our democracy is based on rule of law. It's based on a compact. It's based on certain norms that we expect to uphold over centuries. And if we start to break down those norms, and we start to break down our system of rule of law, then our democracy starts to slip away from us. And I think what's happening within the judicial branch, especially over these Supreme Court nominations, is an example of that. When everything becomes so polarized and so political, we lose faith in those institutions. And one example of that was what Mr. LeBlanc was talking about back in 2016, when the Senate wouldn't even hold hearings. It wasn't that they had a vote and they decided that the majority of the Senate could not confirm this nominee. They wouldn't even hold hearings during an election year. And the reason they gave at the time was that that it would be inappropriate to hold hearings on confirming a Supreme Court justice, I think in February, 9 months before an election, during an election year, and that the voters should have a say in this. It was an interesting theory. It was a new one. We hadn't done that before, and it was a new precedent. However, with that exact same scenario 4 years later, but not even the exact same scenario, people are literally voting right now, and the Senate deciding to hold hearings on a Supreme Court nominee while an election is taking place. Votes have already been cast. That's a breakdown in norms, because you can't have one rule for one political party and another rule for another political party, because then it just makes things worse, because whenever that other party gets in power, they're going to do everything to suppress the other side until you don't have a democracy. And I've seen how that works in other countries, and it doesn't work. The democratic institutions fall away, and all you have is might makes right. You just have a will to power, and we have to preserve those kind of institutions. And so I think I would like a return to that, to norms that are independent of who is in power at the moment, because we can't have one political party saying that they have complete control of our entire society, regardless of the Constitution, which actually what the Constitution says is that the Senate can advise and consent on this. And it's a matter of interpretation what that advice and consent means. But I don't think it means refusing to hold any hearings during an election year like what happened in 2016.
Okay. Well, guys, I think we're done now with our listener viewer questions. However, there appears to be quite a few questions in the YouTube comments. We encourage both of you to answer the additional questions there. And for those that are watching, this will be archived on YouTube. So if your friends or folks weren't able to watch it live, you can go back and watch it later. We are now at the point where we will hear your closing statements. Again, each of you will have 2 minutes. And Mr. LeBlanc, go ahead.
I'm not going to say that I know every answer. I'm not going to tell you that I, have the answer to every problem that we'll be facing or are facing currently. My plan, if I'm elected, is to bring people who do know things to my office, get their advice, make a decision, go from there, without restricting our individual liberties, because that's one thing that we need to keep as Americans. I talk about it with my friends all the time, that one of the problems we have in the United States is that us Americans, we are like the rebellious teenager. So when people put down rules and laws and guidelines, we tend to go buck against it just because that's what we've always done. We've done it since 1776 when we first rebelled against our parent, King George. And so when we start to realize that's just in the nature of being of most Americans, then we have to go, okay, how do we convince those that are rebelling against it just to be rebellious? How do we get those to fall in line and help them, see what the light is? Honestly, I think that Mr. Kulkarni is a really nice person. This is the third time I've done a forum with him. I've enjoyed it. And we have different ideas. We're both going to go about things differently. Our end goal is to make the United States a better place, to make District 22 a better place, a better place for us to live and enjoy the diversity of our community, because it literally is one of the most diverse places in the entire world. Not just the United States, the entire world. And because I've lived in Germany, I've visited a lot of Europe, I've gone to Japan, I've gone to Africa, I've gone to the Middle East. I've seen all these places. We are special here, and we need to uplift that special and get people that are willing to listen to the people of this district, not just their friends and family.
Thank you.
So this is the most important election of our lifetime, and that is not an exaggeration. I hope nobody has any doubt about this after what we've seen in 2020, because we are facing the pandemic of 1918. We're facing the unemployment levels of the 1930s. We're facing the struggle for racial equality of the 1960s, all at the exact same time. And when we see millions of children not able to get a proper education, when we see people facing eviction, over 50 million people have filed for unemployment this year alone. 1 in 6 small businesses have failed. And when we have over 200,000 people who have died this year who didn't have to, we know what is on the ballot. everything is on the ballot. Education is on the ballot. Our economy is on the ballot. Our health and our very lives are on the ballot. And we are facing unprecedented bigotry, corruption, and death in this country right now. But we also know what the answers are. First, we need to believe in reason. We need to believe in science, which should not be controversial in 2020. And unfortunately it is. It should not be politicized. And so getting the coronavirus pandemic under control should be a national challenge that we face together. We need to make sure that we wear masks, that we provide personal protective equipment to our frontline workers, and that we have rapid testing to get past this pandemic. But we also need to make sure that every community has a voice. Everyone has a seat at the table. That has not been the case in District 22 for decades here. And after what we did in 2018, running the most inclusive campaign ever, we expanded on that this time. We're campaigning in 27 different languages. We have people of every different faith, of every different ethnic group, because that's what our communities deserve. That struggle for racial equality is one that we have been fighting throughout our history. But I think that 2020 is going to be a moment, a change in social consciousness like we haven't seen in a generation. And lastly, we have to fight for our democratic institutions. When people are literally taking away our right to vote, doing things like trying to limit voting hours, trying to limit voting locations, even dismantling postal service machines just to prevent people from fighting from exercising their right to vote. We have to fight for our democracy, and we have to fight like our lives depend on it, because they do. So please go to www.shri2020.com, SRI2020.com/action, and take action today, because we are in the fight of lives. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. And thank you both for being civil and pleasant. And I'm glad that no flies came in one of you. So with that, I will now hand off to Angie and Debbie. But I want to also thank OCA-Greater Houston and Mi Familia Vota for allowing me to join you guys this morning. So thank you.
Thank you, Renee.
Thank you, Renee.
Bye.
Renee, that was a really great conversation. Thank you so much for moderating this conversation.
Thank you, Renee. And to both candidates, we wish you both good luck.
Yes. We just want to give people a gentle reminder about voting that's starting to happen fairly soon. So we're about 3 days from early voting, starting on the 13th, this upcoming Tuesday. So in-person voting will begin in the state of Texas, October 13th. We'll go all the way till the 30th. If you plan to vote by mail, please make sure that you are submitting your vote by mail application before October 23rd, that it is postmarked and ready to go. Don't delay, don't wait till the 23rd. Go ahead and do it today. And of course, the big day is almost upon us. November 3rd is your last day to vote in person, and also to have your mail-in ballot submitted.
Yes, and if you want information, if you live in Harris County, the League of Women Voters has a voter guide. It is nonpartisan, it has been vetted, and it is translated into Spanish and Chinese, simplified and traditional, as well as Vietnamese.
We're seeing some comments come in from our youth. We also want to give a huge shout out to our young folks that joined us today. We had about 40 to 50 young high school students and college students that were listening into our candidate conversation. Mi Familia Vota is so glad that we have a partner like OCA-Greater Houston that shares our mission for getting young folks involved now and not waiting till tomorrow. And we have some great civic leaders amongst us watching and listening and ready for the election. So also, if you are planning to submit your ballot in person, keep in mind there's only one ballot drop-off location per county. Please make sure you are prepared to vote. That you have your ID, you know where your polling locations are. You, like Debbie mentioned, you know you have taken a look at the candidates. We have some wonderful resources up here for you to take a look at, depending on what county you live in.
Yes, and then we are continuing to lip drop information, so be sure to be on the lookout for door bags on your doors with information on how to go vote, how to vote safely. And, again, thank you so much to all of our youth volunteers for participating and asking questions and being involved in this process. You guys are the future. You're what's going to make a big difference.
Yes. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope that you share the broadcast with your folks that live in CD-22 and that you get ready to vote. Happy election season, everyone.
Thank you all.